Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this special segment known as For the Shabbos Table, made possible by a grant from the Rubin family, and they ask us to daven for them that they should be zeicha to a ben zachar, and they should have atzlach and ruchnius and gashmius. The Medrash Lekach Tov makes an extraordinary observation about this week's parsha. This week's parsha, every pasuk starts with a vav. It's really amazing. Every single pasuk, except for 8 psukim in the parsha, start with a vav. And the Rokeach, who is one of our great Rishonim, makes the same observation that every pasuk in this week's parsha starts with a vav, something that I'm sure Balei Kriya are very aware of. And so the Medrash says that because vav, like Vayaishev, Vayasaper, vav yud is vay. And there's a lot of woe in this week's parsha. A lot of woe. The sale of Vayaishev, the death of Yehuda's wife, and Erev and Einan, the putting of Vayaishev through the temptations of the wife of Potiphar, the Vayaishev being in the jail, the death of the Sar HaOifim, the baker. It's all in this week's parsha. And he says that the 8 that are missing is because Osnas was Zoicha, even though she was in Mitzrayim, where there wasn't a Jew around anywhere. She was Zoicha to find a shidduch of a mohol, of one who has the bris, which is 8, in marrying of Yosef. That's and the second reason that they give is the second reason that they give is that. What?
This one pasuk doesn't start with a vav.
8 psukim.
There's 8 psukim starts out with a vav. I'm sorry. I didn't hear that.
Take off your coat and sit down. The second reason, of course, is that generally in this parsha falls out Chanukah, which is 8 days. So, of course, those 8 days were not Vai. And it's interesting because also the 8 that were without Vai are surrounded, because Chanukah, unlike the other festivals, Chanukah its miracle time was surrounded with hardship. Because even after the miracle, there was still losses. The Jews still suffered losses at the hands of the Syrian Greeks. It wasn't just a miracle and then everything was fine. It was surrounded by Vai. At the end of the parsha, we learn about the dreams. Now, these were very critical dreams that Yosef interpreted. As a matter of fact, the Balei Musar make much ado out of the fact that although Yosef was wrapped up in his misery in this pit in the ground, away from his brothers, he still had the time to ask the butler and the baker why they looked downcast. And the fact that he took interest in them, Madua Panecha Zoyafais, why you look downcast, he found out about the dreams, which would, of course, eventually lead to him being released and being made viceroy. And the Balei Musar point out that if he wouldn't have taken the time to take note of the crestfallen look of his neighbors, then he would have never gotten out of the jail. And now that was even for Goyim, even for Mitzrim. Right? People are so wrapped up in their own world that they don't notice that the person next to them is out of work already for 6 months, because they're just living in their own bubble. Yosef, I told you many times, is Gematria Tzion, and we learn out from Yosef that we have to notice about the welfare of our neighbors and the people that are around us. That's a very important thing. That's why we always notice that Eddie is in a different hotel room every night. We always notice it. But going back to the dreams, so we know that the royal baker and the royal butler, actually there's probably a fancier word for the wine pourer, would be, there is a fancy word for that.
Wine steward.
No, it's a lot more fancier than that, but, Well, anyway, but we'll call it the royal bartender. That's, so the Medrash, I mean, the Torah says that the royal bartender dreamed that there was a vine and its clusters were ripened, and he had the cup of Paro, and he took the grapes and he squeezed them into the case of Paro. That was his dream. And then the royal baker, he dreamed that he was walking, and he had wicker baskets, 3 of them on his head, and in top of them, the top basket were all pastries, and a bird came and ate from the pastries that are on top of his head. A sommelier. That's the word I was looking for. But anyway, so the question is, how did Yosef know that the bartender, the sommelier, will be put back to his post, and the baker will be executed? So the famous pshat that the world says is that if a person is walking with food, birds don't come, because birds are afraid of a living person. Since the birds came and weren't afraid, that's a sign that he was a dead man walking. That's the famous pshat that the world says, how Yosef knew that the baker was a dead man. However, there's another pshat from Rav Elchanan Wasserman. I've told you many times that whenever I say something over from Rav Elchanan Wasserman, I get very excited. Because when Rav Elchanan Wasserman was in America, he could have saved his life easily. But as Rosh Shiva Baranovich, he felt the captain doesn't abandon his ship. And he went back into the fire and was taken to the gas chambers. And when we say something over from Rav Elchanan, we're actually saying something over from the gas chambers. It says, Sifsaisav Daivavais Bekever. This is really visiting Auschwitz. This is really causing his lips to move. Hashem Yinkim Damai. Rabbi Elchanan says an interesting pshat. Rabbi Elchanan says if you look at the dream of the bartender, he's doing something. He's pressing the grapes. If you look at the dream of the baker is completely not doing anything. Just says he has the baskets on his head. It doesn't even say that he's walking. He's completely stationary. Rabbi Elchanan says a chai, a living person, is a hoilich, is doing something. And therefore Yosef knew that the butler was going to live. The baker is depicted as not doing anything. That's not a chai. You see, it says that a human is a holech and a malach is an oimed. That's why it says that to somebody that's going to live, you say leich lishalom. To somebody that's going to die, it's leich bishalom. He's in peace, but there's no action. In Kiddush we say, Ramila used to say this, in Kiddush we say, Friday night, Asher bara elikim lasis. Now it has many meanings. Hashem created the world, lasis, to be on an autopilot. Right? The sun will keep on working, keep on pumping up the water, keep on going on its But there's something else it means. It means Asher bara elikim lasis. Hashem created man to be productive. Gedayla malacha shemechabedes es baila. Great is work, it honors its doer. A person that's not active is in trouble. A human, Yosef knew the baker was stationary, that was depicted that he's not alive. You know, in the Ksuva, it says, Ana eflach v'oikir v'ezen v'farnes. I will work, I will honor her, I will feed her, and I will clothe her. Obviously, if you're going to feed her and you're going to clothe her, you've got to have money. Why do you have to say, I'm going to work? And why do you say, I'm going to work before you say, I'm going to cherish her? It's important for a man to be busy. Of course, he could be busy with learning Torah. That's also work. The biggest work is Torah. Torah matesh is kaicha shalada. The reason why I always felt the reason why it says I'll work before I'll cherish is because if a man is not working, he doesn't have self-respect. Somebody that doesn't have self-respect can't cherish someone else. You need to have self-respect. Working is critical to living. You know, they say over in the biography to Lubavitcher Rebbe, one of the famous things of Lubavitcher Rebbe is Zechatzak Levrachas Chus Yagen Aleinu, he didn't hold a retirement. He says you can move from one phase to another, but a man never retires. You always have to be busy. There's a sad joke that people go down to Florida in first class, and 3 months later they return in cargo. Because they don't know how to be without working. The Gemara says that even if a woman brings in 100 servants, you could still ask her to do certain work. Because habatola mevia l'dei shi'amun. Idleness leads to depression. So people get sick, they could get depressed. They're not doing anything. Vayiru echav ki oisai ohav aviem mikol ochiv. The brothers saw that Yaakov loved Yosef from all the brothers. Vayisnu oisai, they hated him. V'lo yaklu dabra l'shalom, they weren't able to talk to him in peace. And the pasuk says further down, "Vayosifu aitzna yosai," and they then added to their hatred. They added to their enmity. The enmity kept on growing. The great Rabbi Yonasan Eibchis, the Tiferes Yonasan, he says over here something really important. He says, the pasuk says, you know, I told you many times, that we are the only body of laws that legislates mind control. No constitution of code of Hammurabi or anything legislates mind control. If you're a Gentile, you could hate someone in your mind. You could burn them in effigy in your mind. But Yiddishkeit has mind control. We're not supposed to be jealous. We're not supposed to bear a grudge. And the Torah mandates Leisizna es achicha bilvavecha, rather haicheach toichiach es hamisecha. Yonasan Eibchitz explains that if you hold in a hate, then it stews and it grows. if you talk about it, you release it. And then it doesn't enlarge, and it doesn't magnify, and you don't brood, and you don't stew. Yonasan Eibshitz says this was the undoing. That v'lo yachlu dabru shalom, they weren't able to talk about it. Therefore, v'yasifu oitznai, that's a very good thing to know. Very important in marriage. You're going to hold something in, and hold it in, and hold it in, it's going to grow and grow and become a monster. You have something against a neighbor, a colleague, and you hold it in, it grows, you stew. It's actually a pasuk in Mishlei. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin that elaborates on it. It's a famous visual. Toiter mayim reishis medain. Like a hole in a dam is the beginning of a quarrel. Now, a hole in a dam starts out with a trickle, but if you're going to allow it, it's going to widen and widen until it becomes a torrential storm. The pasuk says, "Paitem mayim reishis medon ulifnei hiskala," and before it becomes too exposed, hariv netaish, turn away from the quarrel. Fighting has to be put out, it has to be extinguished right away, otherwise it grows and enlarges and becomes a monster. There are people that have feuds for decades because they allowed it to sit and become a monster. Now, the Maisa is, it says, "V'lo yachlu dabro l'shalom." They weren't able to talk to him in peace. So the Medrash tells us that when Yosef came and proffered them Shalom Aleichem, they didn't answer. That's what it says in the Medrash. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'hakol niyeh b'dvaro. That's what it says in the Medrash. Excuse me, which begs the question. We know that you're supposed to give people shalom. I mean, they were erlich yidin shvatim, right? It says every makdim shalom kol adam. It says ubakei shalom v'radfeyu. It says if you don't return shalom, gezlas ha'ani biyadecha. Even a poor man that the only thing he has is shalom. If you don't give shalom, you're stealing from him. It's called gezlas ha'ani. So Rashi explains the behavior of the shvatim. It's a famous Rashi. Rashi says, "Mitoich genusam," although it's telling us their disgrace, lamadnu shivcham, we learn their praise. Shloi dibru achas bepeh v'achas b'leiv. They weren't phony. They didn't make believe they were his friend when really they hated him. So they weren't echad bepeh v'echad b'leiv. They weren't insincere. They were real. But there's a question. I once asked this question to the Skolly Rebbe Shlita, who told me he had the same question. The question is, Ramila used to say that although it says chitzoniyos ma'oros pnimius, that our outward behavior affects our interior. So even if we're not feeling a certain way, we should act it, and that will affect our interior. He says it never says the other way around, that pnimios ma'oros is achitzonius. If we have bad feelings inside, we should allow it to affect our outside. It never says that. As a matter of fact, I remember that in that shmooze, he made a statement which shocked me. He said that every wife should be able to win an Oscar. I was surprised that Ramila knew what Oscar was. The wife should be able to win. That means she should be a good actress, even if she's not feeling so lovey-dovey. So there you see that he held that even if inside you're not feeling that way, you should radiate it outside. So what's going on over here? So I researched it this year, and I found that both the Klei Yoker and the Balaturim and also Reb Samson Raphael Hirsch, all say the same thing, that there are certain times where there's such tension that it's better to separate. That pirud is the proper choice, and what you should do, it's a Gemara Makis, is that you should get a third party involved. You should try to make peace al yedei acherim. Because you see over here that when Yosef, they don't want to talk to Yosef. When Yosef talked to them more and told them the dreams, pushed the dreams on them, they hated him more. So you see that they made the choice that under the situation, they can't handle a direct encounter. And that sometimes it calls for a third party to get involved and try to bring peace together. That's a Klei Yakar and a Balaturim. I want to finish off with another very important idea, but before I do, I want to mention that we just started Masechta Sanhedrin. It's a good time to join us. You could come and join us at 7:30. We'll learn Daf Gimel and Daf Daled. Motzi Shabbos, you go to zoomdaf.com and put in meeting code 914408. 914408. We are looking for a sponsor for Masechta Sanhedrin, and we are looking for sponsorships for the Chumash year. 718-916-3100, rmmwsi@aol.com. Vayomer aleim Ruvain, when the Shvatim were thinking of killing Yosef, Ruvain told them, Al tishbechu dam, don't spill blood. Hishlichu Isai al abar, throw him instead into the pit. Laman hitzel Isai miyad, he did it to save Yosef. There is a Pirush on Chumash, which is not available to many people. It's a very chashuv Pirush, the Ralbag. The Ralbag says that we learn out from this a very important advice about giving toichacha, giving rebuke. That sometimes when somebody is doing something wrong, you shouldn't tell him to stop it totally, because then he won't listen. But you should do it in stages. So that's why he knew if he would say, leave him alone, they wouldn't listen. So he did it in stages. He said, put him in the bar. Don't kill him. And this advice is a remarkable piece of advice. Let's say you see somebody talking in shul. Tell him not to talk at all. He's not going to listen. So first tell him, it's a very serious crime to talk during Chazar Hashatz. Try not to talk during Chazar Hashatz. Go in stages. You have a child. The child is chutzpahdik to his mother. So if you're going to tell the child to talk respectfully, that's too much to expect. First say, don't scream. Don't scream. Then the next thing is, when you talk to mommy, don't run around. Sit down so you could think about what you're saying. Think about what you're saying. You're going in stages. Then you could tell him, you're not allowed to tell your mother no. It's halach in Shulchan Aruch. You're not allowed to say no. Then you could tell him, it's your mother. In the entire world, besides Hashem, you have to respect your mother. I remember I was in a camp. I was speaking to 500 girls. It was actually 500 Hasidic girls. I remember it was a Hasidic camp. I remember saying to them, who's the woman in the entire world that you have the biggest mitzvah to respect? So they all said, Mommy. Then I said to them, who's the woman that you've been the most disrespectful to in the entire world? I remember them looking. I saw the wood burning, this. I said to them, these are teenagers. I said to them, you just realized how the Yetzer Hara works. The Yetzer Hara picks his battles. And if he wants to get to us, he gets to us where it counts. That's why he'll do anything. He'll let us do chesed, he'll let us deliver packages, he'll let us do anything, just don't learn. That's learning, that's his nemesis, that's where he pulls out all stops. He'll let us get along with our neighbors, our friends. When it comes to our spouse, whoa, that's war. Because the Shechina is Tali. Isha Shalom B'nei Shechina Shruya B'nei. Again, I want to thank the Rubin family for making this possible. The Mishnah Yomis on Sanhedrin I already did. I'm going to post it now. And we want to thank you for coming and wish you a good Shabbos.